Welcome to another episode of Kevin the Great Witness, the New Adventure series is. I'm Dean Bell, and we have with us Dean Kevin, who's sharing his real side experiences with all of us to help us to become more aware. So welcome, Kevin. What do you have for us today?
This real side experience would seem to be a future view of a kind, and the setting and scenery suggested the planet Earth, bearing in mind that when it comes to future views, what we specifically are shown, whatever it happens to be, is the culmination, the end result of what is being decided and agreed to at the moment on the real side we are afforded these views. When something is decided and agreed upon individually or collectively, a cause has been set in motion that will run through its simulated process to the effect the experience on the physical. But in actuality, there is no time or cause and effect. Everything is this isness, and in the nowness of this reality of what is real, we are instantly that which we decide to be in life. For as we decide something, it is instantly so through the imagination of it, the thought, and any emotion we infuse with it. On the real side, life is. The moment we make our decisions or agreements, it is there. But the nature of the physical level simulation rather converts these ideas into sequences of scenes and imagery that present as our unfolding simulated movie or computer game, to bring us from the point of idea inception to effect experience. But on the real side, we are aside from the cause and effect simulated rollout of the cause to effect process as we stand in the real awareness, and from that real awareness position, as it animates and is through all the consciousness and the ideas that are generated through it, we can potentially see the entirety of the consciousness, the ideas that make it up, and the end result of what an individual consciousness, or the consciousness collectively, is agreeing to and deciding. We see the effect of consciousness as it currently stands, with its construction of decision and agreement, absent of having to go through sequences of scenes to get to that point, like having the movie in its entirety, the real awareness view, rather than having to go through the watching of it, the personal simulated view. And so, what we are shown on the real side is what is being decided now, but as it takes cause to effect time sequences to play out on the physical, very often, as agreements fluctuate as they do, the future viewers we are afforded on the real side may not necessarily come to pass. The instant an agreement changes on the real side, the effect culmination is instantly so or so, but as it takes cause and effect time to play out on the physical, unless an agreement is maintained, it won't reach physical level effect fruition. And so, this particular future view was afforded at the time of this experience, which was around April of 2021, and revealed then that which would be the effect of what was being decided and agreed to at that moment I had this real side view. Perhaps then we might say future views from experiences that are not recent are rather redundant, and perhaps so, but future view experiences do serve as a record then of how the agreement has shifted back and forth, as the future views have fluctuated in accordance, and we have a record then of the physical level effects, the human experience that would have been so had the particular agreements that would have effected such an experience been maintained. This real side experience and future view comprised of two scenes. As I entered this experience for scene one, much had transpired that led up to the moment where my view of this scene began, and I would have the vague sense of it, though no details I could really get my hands around and bring through to the personal self on waking. But in the scene I seemed to have the view from the perspective of a small robot, and I had been carrying out constant activities and operations. But now it's as though my purpose, perhaps, or usefulness, was at an end. One of the scenarios frequently played out in these future views is that of the involvement of robots, from nanobot converted humans that become robot zombie masses, to the aware individuals assuming these mechanical forms also to carry out their beneficial, making sense with life and awareness activities. Either the aware have been unavoidably robotized, as they do also possess the nanos in their bodies, that when activated through the 5G will make this so, but are still able to conduct their business as they stand in their real awareness, that is aside from anything that befalls the personal vehicle and its consciousness, or they have taken on robot bodies as a more prudently robust and resilient form, to better able deal with and work amidst the rigours of deterioration of the planet's biosphere that would overwhelm a biological body type. And here, in this experience, my impressions were that this was the case, that the aware, though robotized, had persisted in their missions and operations, the sense of which I had had when first entering this experience, that of what the robots had been doing prior to the opening scene, though the details not made available. It seemed as was my impression, that we had done all that we could, in whatever potential, dependent on cause and effect agreement, future view this might be, and the further sense was that it hadn't gone as we would have liked, despite our best efforts. And it was as though my robot body was out of energy, running down, my motions laborious and ponderous. I would rendezvous with another aware robot also. The impression was that his robotic vehicle also was ticking down. I'm uncertain if we had been afflicted or damaged in some way that had resulted in our robotic debilitation, but more perhaps that we had decided to power down the robotic vehicles of our own volition. After all, a robotic vehicle could last indefinitely, or at least until simulator implosion, and so there could be a scenario that individuals assuming such immortal vehicles be trapped within them for excessive amounts of time. I suppose that, as with any body vehicle, while on the physical and in creation, you can continue to experience, to create comparisons, to share, earn your way, and recognize the is from. And with such a mechanical vehicle, then, you certainly have more time to do this. Although, for the unconscious unaware, if they were locked into robotic vehicles, making it even less likely, they will see beyond the more heavily programmed personal selves through such vehicles, if indeed such were ultimately used for control purposes, their very thoughts now fed to them, and so conscious control of the personal self is lost also. Then perhaps it could be argued that such a position in life has no awareness potentiality whatsoever, and more sense would it make to pull the plug, as it were, if indeed the unaware robots were able to do so, and very likely they could not, and so resigned to remain locked into externally controlled thought realities. At least for the aware robots, perhaps through their awareness, they are able to do just this, to shut themselves down, if situations reach a point where to remain where they are and in robot forms that never expire makes no sense. If the robot masses of unaware are now unreachable through the mechanical confinement of controlled thoughts, intents, and wants, and so to try and share the references of the is with them would be futile, and perhaps, if nothing further can be achieved in this possible future scenario, then to switch off the robotic vehicles would perhaps make sense for the aware who are able to do this, facilitating then a transition to whatever positions are next, positions according to each aware individual's intent, awareness, recognition, etc. This was indeed my impression here, and it may well have been, perhaps, very far into the future of the Earth, of this particular dimensional timeline, and realistically it was prudent at that moment to depart the physical, as no other options other than staying on the Earth seemed available, and as I said, my sense was that we had done all we could. So there we sat, this other robot and I, and rather watched the gloomy skies as we slowly wound ourselves down. The next scene, I would suggest, was then one that actually preceded the first, and the time frame of which would be far earlier then, in this possible dimensional version of cause and effect agreement Earth. For my view would be of a place on Earth where there was a panic, as some impending situation was to befall humanity, and this was on a global scale, as was my impressions. The first view I had was of one of many government facilities, and although the government very much would be part of the control system that is rolling out further measures of restriction through their planned agendas, it was as though whatever was happening now was going to be as equally grave to the controllers, at least those controllers that operate in the lower tiers of the control hierarchy on Earth, that they would suffer the effects as the masses of humanity now would, the masses they had trawled agreement from, that allowed the continuous control of them, and this impending situation. Perhaps for those controllers higher in the pecking order, this was still, according to their plans, a strictly need-to-know basis, that the lower Earth-based minions would not be privy to, and indeed be sacrificed in this very scenario that had been planned by the higher placed controllers, and now in the process of execution. It seemed though the controllers of the Earth, what I may call the lesser rats, had at one point realized what was about to transpire, realized they were as much stuck with this situation as the human slave masses they had subjugated, and maybe realizing also they had been hung out to dry, as operating in leagues with the dark forces can never be a safe position. If you outlive your usefulness, or even if those above you decide, for whatever reasons they do, that they will eliminate you just as swiftly as they would any human slave, if it takes their fancy. And so these lesser controllers had tried to make some kind of a preparation for what was an alien invasion, as per the impressions I was receiving at this point of the experience, as to the nature of the impending situation. It seemed they were very much working with technology and robotics, and had various robots trundling around their government facilities, looking a little like trash cans, not the most exquisite of designs, but also working with scientific types on their bases. And they had 3 test subjects, the study of which would be vital to offsetting this invasion. I'm uncertain how this would be, or even what or who these subjects were, as I never would be shown, but it seems they hadn't achieved what they hoped to in time, and now the bases were evacuating. One of the lead scientists was trying to prevent the exodus, proclaiming how close he was to securing a solution to the impending situation based on the study of these 3 test subjects, and he would wave his papers around frantically. The departing soldiers and military officers dismissed him with a wave of their hand, telling the scientist that if he wanted, he could continue his work here and send the results, if any, to where these military and government controlling officials now were fleeing to. As it seemed, they had a contingency plan should they fail with their test subject orientated solution, that being a retreat to some secluded and undisclosed location to wait out and possibly survive this invasion. Curiously, all the robots went out of control also, as though controlled now by another force, and they would run amok in the various bases, chasing scientists around, etc., perhaps due to some influence through whatever it was that was invading. A clear case of the controllers rather sticking themselves in the effects also of what they had decided on, created and garnered agreement for the actuality of, through the unaware, programmed masses. But as I said, the higher tiers of the off-planet controllers were safe, and with the idea being to keep everyone in the simulator. Well, this scenario was just as effective as any other. Just another agreed-to situation that had everyone involved, from slave to controller, being resigned to the effects of. So maybe they did indeed drop this little invasion on the planet, an arranged situation that they felt would add to the overall miring of everyone on Earth in cause and effect creation, and the scene would switch to where I had a view of the invasion, as it were, from the perspective of an individual amidst a group of unaware people, which could have been a situation anywhere on the planet, as it was a global invasion. And here we had the unaware, unconscious masses in various states, ranging from fear, panic, to a bewildered bafflement. With this particular group, they seemed to have rallied behind an individual who presented herself as offering a solution. According to her, everyone here ought meditate and connect with the divine goddess, or something along those lines, and at this stage in the affairs of a panicking Earth, it appeared people would latch onto any idea, no matter how foolish, and convince themselves that they might be safe as a result. I had the view from the perspective of one of this group, though I was aware it was just that it wasn't supposed to be representing me in this future view, or at least I hope not, more that I was getting a more immersive experience than I would if I was just observing and separated from what was transpiring. Sometimes with these immersive views from participant perspectives, you get a greater sense of the overall collective consciousness, its fear, concerns. You feel more of the environment also, the smell, etc., than you would if you were just observing from the real awareness objectivity, as though it were a movie. A little like those movies now, where they rock your seats, apply additional smells to the cinema that correspond with the scenes on the screen, spray you with a mist of water, etc., to afford greater immersion. Anyway, through my view, I did point out to these people, as they meditated and did strange rituals that supposedly would appease the goddess, whoever she was, that this would be fruitless. But none would listen, so rapt with their dancing and praying were they, under the direction of the woman who had suggested this option. I would look skyward and proclaim to everyone, "Here they come." A hush would descend over the gathering, as the sky was filled with billowing clouds, and something descended, a mass of something that I couldn't describe. The aliens were here, and this was unfolding on a global scale. The whatever it was spacecraft, looking so strange as to defy description and almost be an insult to my eyes and reason, would only descend to a point, maybe several 100 feet above us and the ground, then drop something. This, I assume also, was going on globally. What landed in our midst, as everyone scrambled clear, as praying to the goddess of salvation had been abandoned seemingly, was what looked like a kind of nest, constructed of dead material, what looked like tree branches and debris, and among which were human remains also, skulls and bones, etc. And then all these mutated and oversized spiders scuttled from the nest, and I knew the intention here was that these spiders would somehow assimilate or absorb every human they found, in some way or other that wasn't clear, just my impressions that this was so. I was supposed to remain in the experience longer and see more, as was my impression, but with these immersive views, this is very often more intense for the personal self. And as these large bloated spiders swarmed us and myself, I would hear myself say, "Sorry, I can't watch any more of this, as I dislike large spiders at the best of times, and would wake myself up, and the experience would end there. So it seems this particular invasion had a rather arachnid theme, or that's how I saw them at any rate. Maybe these spiders were more some kind of nanobot swarm or something, assimilating humans into an alien invading collective, and the humans at this point had not been robotized, so perhaps this represented a robotic conversion on a mass scale, courtesy of this alien invading force. And I have seen nanobots represented as bugs and spiders in previous real side experiences. I suppose mutated spiders may be indicating the alien element of the source of the nanobots. This, of course, would potentially robotize everyone, the unaware and the aware alike, if aware new friends were still operating on the Earth when this took place. A dire situation then, that would perhaps, as I said earlier, make it senseless to remain on the Earth and trapped in robotic vehicles, if no other extraction option were available. The masses now unreachable and beyond assistance, and the robotized aware would continue to do all they could, for as long as it made sense to do so. Then the first scene would roll out that I initially recounted, where the aware robots, who were for whatever reason trapped on Earth, would elect to switch their vehicles off, to power down, and transition from the physical. Perhaps they were new friends who had not then recognized the ears sufficiently that they could position themselves beyond creation and into the real universes of the ears, and for whatever reason no other options had been provided to vacate the Earth. And given the circumstances then, such an action, that of shutting down, made sense. But with real intent maintained, their process would continue just now on the real side. Duane the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "Okay, there goes our history. So here we are, and something interesting to look forward to. And we're trying to warn the world, and it's difficult, I know. I would say the woman represented many who will go to their religions and to their beliefs. Of course, it only makes sense that they will, and hope and pray for something, etc. It is a toughie getting through this, but what you're sharing is evidence for everybody, so they at least have a better chance, whereas before there were no warnings with all the catastrophes that befell the planet, etc."
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Again, it's a lot what you're sharing. I like what you said in the beginning about we are instantly what we decide. we are instantly what we decide. You stated that nicely, and then that's on the real side, but in the physical, there's a sequence of the cause and effect events that happen, and if there's agreement, then it happens here in the physical. But it's kind of, I see that with the real guides, how they instantly, they're so, you know, you could say their frequency is so high, or they're so now that even the thoughts and their reactions are now. There's almost no hesitation. You could say they're quick-witted, or you know, they're always ahead of things about what you say. It's very interesting how being in the now, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but it's kind of interesting how the real guides are just so present that they see everything in the moment. There's no, it doesn't have to be cause and effect and all this sequencing. Everything is now available in the now, so they can kind of collect everything, like what a person is or what he does or says, collect everything and kind of view it and express it to somebody in the nowness of the moment. And then you have a choice whether to, you know, how you look at it, how you respond. But that's, and their value to me, in a way, the real guides is, you could, yeah, they're guides, they point the way, they give us hints and demonstrations, but also to me, their value, if you want to say, is they agree with us to our creations. I mean, as we move along in our awareness to become our real self, they're in agreement. They support us by agreeing to that, to agreeing not only to our process of becoming more aware, but just to our, you'd say, our place or our position with the real awareness. It's that agreement that is so important. And as we agree to them to even exist, they agree to us to exist. Because people don't even exist. They think they exist, that this is just creation and it comes and goes, but the real awareness just is. So that agreement and awareness that we are what we are, that's huge, you know, and that's what the real guides provide. They agree to our process, if we're sincere to becoming who we are. And I see that with Dwayne and his projects, how they agree, if it makes sense. Most of them, they have agreed to his projects, also the research vessel, the university, the environment, you know, saving the planet kind of idea. And REBISAR said, you know, it's a huge nut to crack. One of Dwayne's experiences as he's setting up these projects, huge nut to crack to wake up the whole world and all the things that we're doing here. So that agreement that he has with the real guides, that's huge. Because if he didn't have it, it'd be just another do-gooder guy, you know, or doing something which is okay, but it's not, doesn't cover the whole of things. So yeah, and I had experience with Loma Prieta earthquake. I think it was in '89, where I was sitting, eating a chocolate chip cookie, Mrs. Fields. I don't know if you have that in England, Mrs. Fields chocolate chip cookies. It's pretty good. They're pretty good. It's a franchise. And then the earthquake hit, and this guy sitting next to me on cue, he just like, it's like he was expecting. It's a, you know, the end of the world is here. You know, believe in Jesus, accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior. He's standing up and started raving as everything was shaking. And people were saying, "Shut up, shut up." That yeah, people are going to be like, whatever, going to their gods of man and their religions, and some will be fearful, some will be running around because they have no anchor point. And what we're presenting is real. It's so real that there's it's there's nowhere else to go. You're just real with what's going on, and it's just a matter of facing what's going on. And like Dwayne said today, and it's it's really not that hard to face things. You just go through it. It just kind of comes and goes. Some moments are longer than others, like his experience, the 3 years in hell that he had when he stepped back. But basically, you can get through it with your real awareness. If you position yourself well in your real awareness, you can get through anything. And that's what the real guides have shown us and demonstrated, that it can be possible to get through creation and move on to something better, better. You don't have to stick around here. Although they do, but you have an objective, impersonal, indifferent viewpoint of things here, and you can handle things and get things done. So the robotics, yeah, who knows? This is one scenario here. Like you say, this happened in April of this year. So that was May, June, a few months ago. Things changed through agreements and decisions. But this is great experience to share. I do hope to make it into some kind of Netflix series or something eventually. I'm always looking at that, all these experiences you have, Kevin, to put them into a movie documentary format somehow. They're cool for others who follow along, or who are, like Paul said once, there's always somebody ahead of you, there's always somebody in back of you, if you want to put it that way. Everything's now, but in the creation world, there's always somebody that's more aware than you, and there's always somebody that's less aware. So what? That's just the way it is. But as we move along here and put these into documentaries and movies, these would be great to do that with. There's a lot of material here, a lot of content to work with. So again, thank you, Kevin. That's great.
Yeah, at the time of the sharing of that experience, as I said, the future views I was receiving were basically the culmination of what was being decided and agreed to at the time, whereas on the real side, you are shown the completion of the agreements, which obviously then have to roll out in cause and effect simulated creation. And at the time, a lot of future views were looking a bit bleak and not very promising, but literally in the space of a few months between then and now, things have certainly shifted. And that, what I just said then, represented the possibility of the dark forces perhaps staging or arranging with other factions of their dark force control systems a detrimental alien invasion that wouldn't obviously be beneficial to the human race in any shape or form. But in more recent real side experiences, I've been shown that there is indeed aliens and their spacecraft with an impending arrival on a mass global scale, but this is backed by the guides and life and represents a benefit, not anything detrimental. And indeed, a lot of the dark forces have switched sides and are also backing the guides and life with this endeavour also. So I said, so in the space of a few months, those very bleak views where everything seemed lost, everyone was going to be robotized, controlled by the dark forces and various alien invasions and nanobots running amok and whatever, control everybody, that has more or less flipped on its head now. And as agreements seem to be, and they seem to be fairly maintained, because the views I'm having now are fairly consistent, that that the aliens are going to arrive here, but again, as I said, they're going to be more beneficially and making sense with the life inclined. And so, yeah, I quite like the analogy as well, which I said about the DVD. I said, like, in the nowness of the is, you are your intent, and that is contained within the nowness of the real awareness, which would be where you would see not only the intent and the decisions, but the effect that comes from it as well. And so that would be almost like holding the entire DVD in your hand from the real awareness perspective. But from the personal self perspective, you then got to go through the movie And of course, then as agreements change, so would the movie change as well. But any time the agreements change, so would the movie in its entirety would change, and that would still be the view from the real awareness perspective.
Things are very fragile in a way, you know. Everything is just moment by moment how things are decided. So we will see where this goes. We'll always see. We just do the best we can, and we encourage people to do something at least. Sing the NUUU, do something as a benefit for the whole, and just pay attention, keep alert, be prepared. Watch these meetings that we have. Go to, while it's still on, go to Kevin's YouTube channel, soon to be only in brand new tube apparently, but there's a lot of material there that you can learn from, and it's to your benefit. So thank you, Kevin.
We'll then move on to experience number 2. In this real side experience, I would find myself on the ground floor of my house, so very much representing then the personal self. Although here my house seemed vastly extended in size, the rooms far larger than usual, and my back garden very extensive. Generally, this tends to be the case, as although our physical level homes are recreated on the real side as representing the personal self, the personal self comprises of a great complexity of created consciousness, with all the endless ideas, agreements, and attachments that make up its construction, that we are conscious of, but generally, mostly unconscious of, and so this is rather expressed as a recreated house that if we start to explore the unconscious areas of the attic, the basement, the back garden, we can expect to find a far larger house than the actual physical level home that it is a replica of, to accommodate all the unconscious agreements and idea attachments. On the personal side, the ground floor, and in the living areas, will be that which we are conscious of, and so anyone entering our homes on the real side and being present in such areas of the house present as those we have conscious agreements with. In this experience, my living room area was vastly expansive too, to accommodate a whole array of various individuals that I had allowed into my experience, conscious agreements that they may be permitted access. The vast majority I couldn't identify through my personal self, through the memory files of current lifetime affiliations and associates, but perhaps more so associates that my personal self hasn't been shown by a real awareness that is going about its business, encountering all that it does, and who it does, and showing my personal self what it decides to allow it to see. Although one individual was there that I could identify, and that was Lindsay, my sister, as she does feature on the real side on occasion, as agreements with her are retained, though her interest in what is real does fluctuate from dismissal to acceptance, as I occasionally speak to her on the physical and the real side about the references of the ears. So not an entirely nonsensical agreement with her that she can feature in my experience, as she may be gradually coming around by increments and degrees. The other day on the physical, for example, she seemed very open to my explanations about creation and such, but perhaps due to her not fully embracing her real intent and deciding to step up and take the risk-taking leap, if you will, it's very possible that she can represent a tap-lining agent unbeknownst to her. For through an overwhelmingly personal self-immersed individual can operate the influence, and other dark force characters also can tapline you through the agreement associations you make with others who would be unconscious and oblivious of this. For Lindsay would speak of how she had been approached by what she referred to as highly evolved spiritual beings, as were her references, and they were apparently guiding her accordingly. Apparently her spirit guides numbered 3, and would communicate with her telepathically and continuously. I was intrigued, as I considered the possibility that perhaps Lindsay was being assisted by the real guides, and so inquired of Lindsay if I might speak with these 3 individuals she was in communication with and being provided guidance from. She would agree, and suddenly I would find myself in communication with these 3 beings. I would never perceive them, or have impressions as to their appearances, body forms, or species, only hear their voices and words. I had the impression 2 were men and 1 was a woman, and as I listened, it became rather apparent that these were not real guides by virtue of what they uttered, as they would make no mention of the real universes, of real awareness, and of the process through creation that is required to recognize this true reality. Indeed, they seemed to be rather more along the lines of self-appointed guides. And there is many an individual who decides this, most of which operate from the astral position, have an oversight and view of the physical level, and may seem very knowledgeable, but their awareness doesn't extend much beyond the astral level, and they tend have no understanding or awareness of anything beyond creation. Their guidance is rather limited then to creationally based ideas, suggestions, and options. And also, through agreement with astral-based individuals will come the taplines, tap lines that bind the masters to the students, the spirit guides to the guided, and indeed, many spirit guides are not what they seem. Many are shape-shifting reptilians, assuming forms that may appear very much like guides if witnessed, but are in fact tap-lining and drawing energy from the agreeable follower. And most masters, teachers, spiritual leaders, and self-appointed guides also tap-line those that agree and follow them. And they all just add to the confusion, keep everyone one-dimensional and looking only to literal creation, and provide nothing of the information that allows awareness of the ears, or the connection to it, the NUUU song, the real guides, etc. And in fact, it would seem as though these three self-proclaimed guides had rather poison-tipped tongues. They were very convincing with what they said, and their objective seemed to be to cause derision, mistrust, and altercation between all these individuals gathered in my living room. For Lindsay, my sister, they were maintaining their rather convincing spiritual guide act, and she was very much deceived, and would hear no word of how these three were anything other than what they presented themselves as to her. But for me, and some of the others here, it's as though we all had a greater awareness that we could see through the deception, and even if awareness was lacking, by virtue of the lack of real references these three guides spoke of, this would indicate these guides were not what they seemed to be. I had the impression all in my house were those on their process of awareness, but at various stages, and as such, these three guide beings would move unseen among us all, and spread their poison, resulting in all manner of arguments and squabbling. One individual was accused of something very dire, I forget exactly what, and it was as though some of the others there wanted to literally execute him for such deeds. I would rather attempt to defend the unfortunate individual who was the victim of unsubstantiated accusation. One of the individuals who was leading the small group that sought to harm the accused individual seemed to be a German, judging by his accent, though he spoke English here, and also he seemed to lack a head. His body seemed to terminate at the neck, and rounded off at the top like a stump, yet this didn't seem to cause him any difficulty with speaking or seeing for that matter. We might literally say this individual had lost his head, lost his real awareness discernment of the situation, and was rather immersing himself with the others in creational literal ideas of cause and effect confrontation. It was all rather a mess, and indeed these three fake guides even would float the accusation that on the physical level I had someone locked in my basement as a prisoner. And I didn't even have a basement on my physical level house, let alone a prisoner to contain there. This caused further uproar, however, and finger-pointing. It all was turning into utter bedlam. What we had overall was a group of beings on various stages of their awareness process that I had agreements with that we could feature in each other's real side experiences and carry out whatever assignments and activities were in alignment with our real awareness intent, but that my agreement to my sister allowed her to feature here also, as I was leaving myself rather open to her in light of how she may still come around to stepping up herself. But because of her position, she evidently had been deceived by individuals masquerading as guides of a kind, and although what they uttered wouldn't fool an aware individual, or one that had at least the references that Dwayne has provided, it was enough to convince her based on her lack of understanding and awareness. As such, she had rather been motivated, though able to, due to my agreements that allowed her access, to enter our experience, and even though she was sincere enough, she genuinely thought these three beings were the real guides I had made mention of. They were anything but, very likely reptilians, and through her they were like an infection, spreading their venom and causing the disruption they had obviously intended to induce. At one point, however, the scene switched, and we were suddenly in another setting. I was with the same group of individuals from my house, only Lindsay was absent, and there was a new individual present, a dark-skinned lady who had a great awareness about her. Not a real guide, but not far from it by my estimation. She looked, in fact, rather African. She would explain to the group what had happened, how the deception was designed to cause what had transpired, to cause derision among this particular group. She also proclaimed that as the group was of various stages of awareness, it was as though that only those with an awareness standing beyond a certain point would be able to brush this all down to experience, shake loose all the ideas that had been created around it and in response to it, and continue on with their process of awareness without issue. However, there were about a half of this particular group that were so effectively dragged down into the mire of ideas and emotions, the confusion and attitudes, that it seemed as though they couldn't extricate themselves from the illusion of it, as though these three fake guides had been successful in instilling enough doubt with those not aware enough to see through the deception that for them and in their minds this had them convinced that the whole process of awareness, the real guides, the NUUU song, and all that it entails was tainted or corrupt, and as such they would step back into their personal selves and decide whatever they would for themselves. So a heads up, I would suggest that as we know, there are endless fake guides, replicas, clones, holograms. Most are reptilians masquerading as real guides, and their objective is to spread confusion and put people off their processes of awareness, to cause doubt and derision, and generate mistrust among the new friends. But of course they are very apparent by their actions, by their deeds, and on occasion such as this example, by the distinct lack of knowledge and real references they provide or are aware of. And no wonder they were in hiding also, for were they to be present in the experience, they would be even more apparent as the fakes they obviously were, but effective enough with those beginning their process, which a number of this particular group in the experience were. A very precarious time for them, as they always have to decide to continue on, and even if their choices were made in response to deception, we still must respect their free will decision to step back. But maybe they will realize the error of such a decision, realize they were tricked, and I'm sure the real guides will be attempting to have them see the sense of the situation, as up until that moment they were sincere with wanting to become more aware. Duane, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "There's a lot to recognize. Again, like the sun shining, we are all beings of light, and when we stand in, realize and recognize that position, that's huge. In the meantime, yes, so much for relationships that we've created here, and all the identities with them, etc. And yes, everyone is going through their process, and they make choices. I too have family members, a daughter, brother, etc. But you might say I stand my distance because they make their own choices. I don't try to influence them in any way, or try to think that I want them to think or be a certain way. No, I don't go there at all, because you're connecting to them, and realistically, it's time to grow up. There's no such thing as these identities. Dad, mum, sister, brothers, all this stuff. We're all beings making choices. That's real. And what we see, what we experience, you have the personal self there and what it wants. People in their personal self, they want happiness. They want their la-la land. They want salvation. They want someone to save them. They have all these wants, and so they will cater to the words of others, just like people cater to politicians and their pretty words, thinking that by the very fact that these people say something, it will become so. But we've learned that it is not so. And really, it is the whole of life. It is all life that is real. And yes, we're each going through the process respectfully, but at the same time taking on another person's experience. That's something else. Well, you do in a certain way, like a mother has children, takes them on and rears them up, etc. But I taught my daughter to be independent, self-sufficient. That was my focus, and went off her real side experiences. But at a certain age, she decided her own life, and that was it. I was there until she was the so-called legal age, which was 18. Then she was on her own, making her own decisions, went to college, her career. That was her decision. I never interfered. I never suggested this or that. I always looked at her awareness and her intent, and what she decided with that, that was her choice. It's not that she's my daughter, and I think this is what's best for her. We see that in the movies, and those are all ploys. Again, in nature, when the birds raise their young, at a certain point, they kick them out of the nest. It's like fly or whatever. The thing is, it's time to go. You're big now. You have to figure it out. And through the process, we do. And you're willing to go through it yourself. And the biggest part is the sharing of it and the supporting of what we're doing here. Like a big football team, and we're all playing our part to get to the goal so that everybody's okay. We're assisting each other. I'm here for everyone, to assist everyone, but I cannot live their life. I cannot decide for them. I don't want to do that. And when it comes into the personal area, because you have a personal life, what you're going to have for dinner, or who you're going to date or marry, or what job you're going to have, that's your business. It can be discussed a little bit, but my focus is showing each person how to become more aware so they can make their own choices and they're okay, and we all stand real with each other. I'm very grateful that others are here and with what they're doing, and see that as a support for what I'm doing, the sharing with others, and so we all support each other. Just by the fact we're here and with each other, and not telling each other what to do, we each have our experiences, we each decide what part we want to play. Very important. It's time to grow up, to get real, and we can relay this to our so-called families and have a discussion about what makes sense to be real with each other. How about discussing that? And we all get through it, and let's do it, and let's have more fun being real like the sun shining, instead of having all these misunderstandings where everybody tugs and pulls at the ideas they want and want to decide what others are to do. Again, this is where we go through lifetimes and lifetimes of unnecessary drama, and we've done that, and it's all okay, because we're now, and we can make a new decision now.
I see Lindsay's guides there as, there's different kinds of guides, and like you say, there's all kinds of entities and things on the real side. I see some as very professional. They're very good at what they do, and some just they're kind of hanging on and doing, kind of like amateurs. But yeah, I know this lady that has I'd say a professional guide or entity hanging around her. She's Christian. I might have mentioned her before, but she's very adamant in what she has experienced, and through her dreams and her experiences with the Holy Spirit, and all that. But I see it as a guide, someone who's like influencing her. But I see also as this guide wants to, he's or she or it wants to wake up more. And it's like almost like this guide has done a boo-boo, like he's done something to influence this woman, but he sees his so-called effect, and he wants to wake up out of it. But she's in the middle of it all, and she wants to keep to that idea of Christian idea, but he or it wants to see through it. So she's in between me, like sharing, and this other entity who's trying to wake up too, and she's in between, but she's so adamant and stubborn that she doesn't want to move. So it's a real challenge for the guides and for us to see how we can reach people in a way where they can relate to. And that's part of what we're doing with the environment. We're relating people in a way, because the environment is seriously in jeopardy here of being destroyed, which it already is, being poisoned, but it's totally being destroyed. So the real guides use something we can relate to, as you often are expressing, Kevin. In this case, this woman, is raised Christian, so they relate to her in a Christian way. But you could get caught up in that too. So you do need the knowledge as well as the sincerity, which Lindsay has sincerity, this woman has sincerity, but you also need the knowledge and other things too. You need to do something, but there's a whole slew of things that kind of have to put together to process this thing, to become more aware. And knowledge is one part. That's why we're here too, to give the different viewpoints to people. The real education, you could say, different viewpoints for them to relate to wake up, because it takes a whole lot. It takes a whole lot to wake up, not just one or two things, but you need to see the whole thing and how it works. And do you ever really see it? No, but at least you can get in the process of doing it to wake up. Yes, and that's about it for me, I guess. Do you have anything else, Kevin, for this experience generally?
I mean, when you do extend agreement to an individual, you are extending agreement to everything and all the ideas that make up that individual's created consciousness also. And so when you're dealing with a very personal, self-immersed individual, all their agreements they have through their consciousness they're agreeing with and staying and sticking with are all intertwined with agreements to the controllers. So in a sense, you're not just dealing with an agreement to an individual for what you see on the surface, you're dealing with all the ideas that incorporate their created consciousness that also involve agreements to the reptilians that you don't see. And so basically you agree to an entire package of ideas that when you agree to that, you are then effectively allowing it into your experience. And that's how these reptilians can tap line you through these individuals, and also almost through a conduit you have created by the agreement to this individual who is infused with agreements with reptilians. You can allow them into your simulated experience, and that's how they sort of get in. Now they can tap line you through, you know, you can be tap lined through these individuals. And I thought it was very interesting what you said about the person who was almost sharing her consciousness with an entity, because in theory that wouldn't necessarily be a destructive situation, because simply would be effectively two individual awarenesses sharing a consciousness through which they could then experience creation, the simulation, and then through that become more aware as a consequence. But I suppose where it becomes a problem would be where if the entity was ill-intended and started to influence the individual in a non-beneficial way. But in that case, as you were saying, it sounds as though the entity is fairly sincere and it wants to become more aware and is even implanting its own ideas into the consciousness almost as thought forms and such, to try and stimulate the individual whose consciousness it is to sort of move it or make decisions and agreements in such a way that will affect experiences that would more favour somebody wanting to see more than what the consciousness currently is. So, but
there's no interference or with this entity, like some of the Christians are really into interfering with you, you know, trying to change your mind. Here, it's not that. It's just being in a certain position of agreement. So there's an opening still here for, you know, a kind of a relationship or a communication to see more. Is what happens when you're so self-convinced about something, you just cut off at all really communications. You're just in your own area there. You know, listen. You don't really listening to something. But here, there's still an opening. There's still an opportunity, and I see that for a you know, as long as I see that, you know, I'm willing to go along with it. If they're not, then it's useless, really, and you have to move on, because there's more people that are sincere, that want to wake up, and we're giving them the opportunity to do so as we go through the social media and in our contacts with people in the physical. But as long as a person's sincere and sincerely wants to see it, and you can see, you know, in a way, we're talking to real awareness with people. Like Dwayne says, he's talking to real awareness. He's not talking really to the personal self. That's involved, but it's the real you that the real guides talk to and communicate with, you could say. So we too are in that position, and we use the personal self and its desires and its likes and dislikes to kind of play around with, and to like see if we can position the person so that he or she can see more of what's really going on. So it's you know, it's a challenge, but it's almost an art to do this, you know, to help people wake up. You really can't smash through things, although sometimes that's necessary too, but anything goes, really. It just makes sense of things and to be real with people, and they see that, and then they can choose, you know, what they want to do with it. But being real with people is important too. And as we become more aware, we become more real. So thank you, Kevin. It's fun. Thank you. Unless that's it. That ends our show today. We usually sing NUUU, and that's our connection to something real, something that can help you become more aware. New you.
You.
Thank you again, Kevin, for all you do. Thank you.